The images from 3I Atlas show something that no astronomer had expected. It looks as if the interstellar comet has an anti-tail. A tail that does not point away from the sun as usual, but toward it. But that's just one of many mysteries that our visitor has in store for us. In addition, the chunk also has an unusual composition, a rapid increase in brightness. And it has recently even undergone a mysterious acceleration that cannot be explained solely by the influence of gravity. NASA has now released new data and images in a press conference, but researchers like Avi Loeb remain skeptical. So what is the story behind the strange behavior of 3I Atlas? Could it be that something completely different from a natural comet has entered the solar system after all? Or can the supposed anomalies be explained in another way? Be sure to stay tuned until the end and find out with us. Discovered on July 1st, 3I Atlas is only the third known interstellar object ever to visit our solar system. The fact that this celestial body has come to us from the depths of the Milky Way is proven by its highly hyperbolic trajectory. 3I Atlas is not gravitationally bound to the sun and is crossing our home world at an extraordinary speed of more than 200,000 kilometers per hour. The crucial question now, of course, is what exactly 3I Atlas is, and experts no longer have any doubts about this. The majority of researchers are now certain that our guest is a comet, and comets are known to form tails. There is a very simple reason for this. When these chunks of space rock approach the sun's rays heat up the ice in the comet's core, causing it to sublimate, that is, to transition directly from a solid to a gaseous state without first becoming liquid. In the process, small dust particles are carried along, and this mixture of gas and dust creates the coma, or the glowing shell of the comet. The coma eventually forms the distinctive tail, which normally always points away from the sun. And that's not really surprising. After all, the solar wind and the radiation pressure of the sun always push a comet's tail away from our central star. Well, actually, but in the case of 3I Atlas, experts were initially confronted with something completely different. Even in the early images, a so-called anti-tail was visible, a tail pointing toward the sun and thus in the wrong direction. Such a phenomenon is highly unusual and immediately caused a great deal of speculation online. What does it mean? Does the tail prove that something completely unusual is happening at the core of 3I Atlas? Does it even fuel the idea that the object may not have a natural origin after all? Or is there a plausible explanation for this supposed mystery? What's really behind the anti-tail? It may come as a surprise, but ultimately it was none other than Avi Loeb who provided a natural explanation for the anti-tail of 3I Atlas. Currently, the Harvard professor is better known for his, well, unconventional perspective on the interstellar visitor. Loeb repeatedly points to the unexpected characteristics of the chunk and grapples with the provocative question of whether the object could ultimately be something artificial after all. In the case of the tail mystery, however, such an exotic approach is not necessary. Together with Eric Kido, Loeb has developed a model that shows that the anti-tail is largely caused by water ice grains that are ejected from the comet and survive for a long time on their trajectory. Let's imagine how the comet and its dust particles move through space. Some of these particles remain close to the comet's orbit for a long time, forming a thin plate behind the chunk. But now we're looking at this dust cloud from a very specific angle on Earth. And suddenly it looks as if the tail is pointing in the wrong direction. But in reality, and this is the crucial point, the particles are not actively flying toward the sun, but are simply following the comet's orbit as normal. So it's all a question of perspective, but the fact that 3I Atlas recently experienced a strange acceleration cannot be explained quite so easily by an optical effect. A few weeks ago, the chunk passed through the perihelion, the point in its orbit closest to the sun. However, it did not behave as experts had expected, and thus immediately followed in the footsteps of a very different interstellar visitor. Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor in 2017, was slowed down somewhat less than pure gravitational influence would have allowed when it approached the sun. Astronomers have now observed the same thing with 3I Atlas. It also received an additional speed boost that cannot be explained by gravity alone. And now there are two ways to approach this so-called non-gravitational acceleration. On the one hand, we could attribute it to artificial propulsion technology, and on the other, to the result of a surprisingly strong but purely natural outgassing. When ice sublimates and gas is ejected at high speed, it actually acts like a small recoil. But what does NASA actually have to say about this? Well, the famous space agency has finally spoken up again and held a press conference that Avi Loeb didn't like at all. Official insights and unanswered questions. On November 19th, NASA presented new data and images of 3I Atlas at a press conference, the first since the US government shutdown had caused weeks of delays. Expectations were correspondingly high. After all, the interstellar visitor is still surrounded by a number of big question marks. However, in order to take the wind out of the sails of all alien speculation right from the start, the administrator in charge emphasized that 3I Atlas is clearly a comet. According to him, the findings to date leave no doubt that the object looks and behaves as one would expect a comet to. But of course, it didn't stop at this basic statement. In addition, new images of the comet taken with the high-rise instrument aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter were shown, as well as images from space telescopes and ground-based observatories. However, anyone hoping to marvel at the object in razor-sharp detail was left disappointed. Instead, the images showed 3I Atlas as nothing more than a blurry spot of light, while the complex tail structures were also only vaguely visible. Apart from that, the press conference did not reveal any spectacular new discoveries. Essentially, it merely repeated already known facts about the comet's orbit, brightness, and activity, and that is precisely what upset Avi Loeb. Just a few hours later, he published an article on the Medium platform with the headline, "Nothing is more deceptive than an official fact, NASA press conference on 3I Atlas," in which he sharply criticized those responsible. Specifically, Loeb complained that NASA hardly addressed any of the open questions, namely the non-gravitational acceleration, the rapid increase in brightness, the astonishing size compared to the previous interstellar visitors, and the directed jets that amateur astronomers had observed in the weeks before perihelion. For Loeb, the official explanations overshadowed the actual scientific mysteries instead of clearly highlighting them. And so it is that, according to Loeb, the most interesting observations did not come from NASA, but from amateur astronomers whose images show the jets in their full length. In the best anti-tail manner, these point both away from and toward the sun, and extend up to 1,000,000 kilometers. Loeb emphasizes that it's precisely these detailed observations that could reveal whether the jets are caused by natural ice deposits or possibly by targeted and directed outgassing. At the same time, he called on NASA to investigate whether 3I Atlas is accompanied by smaller objects that could be either fragments or mini-probes. As we can see, Avi Loeb never tires of keeping his colleagues on their toes with unconventional approaches. For him, 3I Atlas remains a fascinating and enigmatic object that continues to raise more questions than it answers. But even if the enlightening answer is not ultimately that 3I Atlas is an extraterrestrial spacecraft, its investigation is of extraordinary importance for our understanding of space. Spectroscopic analyses have shown that it differs significantly in chemical composition from the known comets in our solar system. Particularly striking is the astonishingly high ratio of CO2 to H2O. It also emits nickel without the usual iron. But it's not only its chemistry that is unusual. As it approached the sun, 3I Atlas increased in brightness much faster than experts had expected. So far, we have no clear explanation for this development, but it shows that interstellar visitors can be more dynamic and complex than classical comet models predict. And finally, we must not forget that such objects are always messengers from their home worlds. Studying them shows us what conditions prevail in distant star systems and how matter behaves under the extreme influences of interstellar space. And so it is that experts will continue to keep an eye on 3I Atlas in the future, even from the depths of space. A lucky coincidence has led to the chunk crossing the path of the Jupiter space probe, JUICE. The probe is currently examining the comet from a distance of around 60 million kilometers, and its measurements could reveal which particles are outgassing from 3I Atlas, thereby revealing more about its origin. However, a little patience is required before this happens, as the JUICE data will not reach Earth until early 2026. But you can get your new subscription right away. Just click on the thumb and subscribe to never miss a new video from us again. See you soon.